because,
Sorry.
oh, there we go. Now it's
There we go.
working.
Wonderful.
At the corner of John Adams and 3rd, there are some very large trees that are probably eligible for, just by their DBH, their diameter, for being part of the grove. And if they are in city right-of-way, as opposed onto the private lots adjacent to the right-of-way, they could be part of the Heritage Grove and serve as kind of like a grand kind of tunnel of trees as a gateway entrance from the main part of the McLaughlin district into that Heritage Grove of Waterboard Park. So those, I'm suggesting it now just because it would give staff time to kind of like research some of the background information on tree size and property ownership, et cetera, and regulations, so that y'all can have it when you consider it next month.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Hey, can I ask one clarifying question? When you have something like Heritage Grove, how is like the needs for maybe like passive recreation or wildlife habitat preservation? I mean, because you can have different uses for the area, but depending on how you emphasize things, some things, if you increase public access or recreation, you can diminish the value for wildlife habitat or vice versa. How are those things weighed?
Oh, it really depends on the grove that you're talking about, I suppose, and the size of it. But there's the code definition, which says it's 2 or more trees separated by no more than 20 feet. Whatever that is good for. But I think in terms of specific areas like this, here you're talking about, or parts of this are considered a charter park, which is called out in the city charter as there's only certain things that you can and can't do with a charter park without a vote of the people, maintain and that sort of thing.
Sure.
Certainly the Parks Department is responsible for the general welfare of those parks in this case, but a Heritage Grove potentially could provide a multitude of uses depending on its size and location. So we'll have to look at that in mid-April. Yeah, if the size of the park is significant enough that it contributes to habitat continuity. I believe this is in the Natural Resource Overlay District. We'll talk about that more in April. And so there's there are very specific limitations on things you can and can't do in the Natural Resource Overlay District as well. But in terms of active and passive recreation, those are all potentially doable in a Heritage Grove, I suppose. Yeah. With review. Yeah.
Okay, is there any other questions? Okay, I'd like to backtrack just a second, and I'd like to do roll call, and I'll also have each of us say their name and affiliation, just for the benefit of the public here, and we can go from there. So do you want to start?
Sure. Eric Carr, and I'm also the urban conservationist at Clackamas County Soil and Water Conservation District.
Jerry Herman. I run an education and training program for at-risk youth at the River Resource Museum. My group is called Earth Crusaders.
I'm Brian Boyce. I'm chair here. I'm also chair of the Clackamas River Basin Council and do software support by trade.
Bob Roth, Oregon City resident.
Andrew Sinise, Oregon City resident.
Got that?
Okay. I have one more request to speak here, and we'll go ahead and let Kathy Roth come up.
Stewart sign up?
Yeah, he's on that list there.
Kathy Roth, Oregon City.
Okay.
I have a question about this being a natural resource overlay district. Is that what you called it?
Portions of it are in the Natural Resources Overlay District that's adopted.
Okay, so what would that restrict development to?
Well, when you read the code section for that, there's a list of prohibited uses, permissible uses, and uses allowed under prescribed conditions. Typically, that is a development control ordinance, so nothing development-wise can be done within the Natural Resource Overlay District without a concurrent application for compliance with that district. It's protecting streams and wetlands and watersheds and that sort of thing. So it requires a Type 2 or a Type 3 land use application for any kind of development activity. Development activity is defined as in the code, including clearing of land over a certain amount and all sorts of other items that pertain to development. Restoration activities, removal of invasive species, certain types of trails, etc., are all permitted uses. There is a very specific set of criteria for the permissible uses because the idea is that they are not going to impact the resource values. So, but if you have a private piece of property and you're in the Natural Resource Overlay District and you wanted to develop a portion of it, you have to delineate the resource and show the vegetative corridor around the protected feature. There's also mitigation requirements for any disturbance that is made for the development. And it has to be prepared by a qualified person, such as a naturalist, a botanist, or a hydrologist, depending on what the resource is, or a wetland specialist, that sort of thing.
My question leads to, I've been talking to some developers that build cottage houses. Are you familiar with that?
Okay, yeah.
And, thinking that a little group there of 8 to 10 cottage houses would be something very nice if it was put into the setting. Would that be prohibited in this type of...
Very likely, well, we'd have to see where. I mean, the city adopted a boundary and a vegetative buffer. Unless there's a lot of record, meaning a lot that existed prior to the ordinance being adopted, it would be very difficult to develop within the overlay district. You might be able to develop a certain percentage within the buffer, but you'd have to mitigate for the same percentage by improving the habitat and providing 2 times the amount of mitigation area for each amount of disturbance in the district. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, that brought up a question. There's what area does this overlay apply to in the water board?
It applies throughout the city to all Title III and 13 habitat areas.
Okay.
It's an overlay map. You can turn on and off. You can see it on OC Web Maps.
Okay. Does it apply to anything that we've been talking about in the...
Yeah, potentially. At the end of the meeting tonight, I was going to show you briefly how to use OC Web Maps and how to look at land use applications online.
Okay.
So I could do a brief tutorial on that at the end of the meeting.
Okay. Okay, the next agenda is our minutes for the last 3 meetings. And and we don't see our secretary.
Yeah, Marlo's sick. I apologize if I've gotten anything wrong on these. Bob had pointed out that I may have some of the present and absent and excused incorrect. So if you have any corrections, let me know.
Okay.
Yeah. But,
Before we act on this, Mr. Chairman, are we taking any action on these
these are just public comments.
Tonight?
It's public comment. We don't need to take action.
Okay.
So, but it's all good information. So.
Absolutely. It was my understanding that the City Commission was asking us to look at this Waterboard Park issue. Is that true?
Coming up before you in April.
In April?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we'll act more discreetly in April.
Yeah, I think we'd
correct.
be asked for some sort of a opinion or recommendation in April.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll be providing further information too about the nomination with and about some of the trees in there, the ones that we have information on.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sorry I was late. My
Oh, that's
watch
okay.
was 10 minutes off, and that makes me at least 20 minutes off. But I was 10 minutes off. And I don't know whether Norm spoke to the fact that there is going to be a workshop at his armory. Did you do that?
We'll do next Saturday, this Saturday, and plus the two after it. We could set the month of March aside for the restoration of the cleaning area. I have a picture.
Norm, if you'd like to come up and speak real quick. Yeah,
It just seems like before we leave the subject area.
sorry,
Couldn't find
Brian.
one of the slips back there, so. Anyway, this is a picture of the city picture of the park area, all 22.5 acres of it. I've been in charge of the army for the past 18 years as the facilities director, and we've watched over the years a lot of citizens and neighbors up there using the park area for recreation. And it's, for a while there, it really went down, the graffiti and vandalism up there, plus growth of the English ivy and so forth. It was, just drove us to do something about it. So with Jerry's help, we submitted a grant proposal to the city under the City Metro Enhancement Grant, and we received a few dollars to go up and start restoration. We've been working under Larry Potter in the city as we do this. Right now we're busy cutting vines off the trees. We've cleared several areas of just down brush, slash growth, if you please, and we're taking graffiti off, and we've posted it for a park, and we've talked to the neighbors up there, and those that are using it for recreation purposes. It has other purposes. There's tremendous growth of natural habitat up there, natural growth, plus a small herd of deer that seem to have selected that spot to have home base on. So it's really a beautiful place, and about halfway up the hill, the road makes a hairpin, semi-hairpin turn, and that's been cleared out, and we're going to put a picnic table and benches in that area for a resting spot, and around on the other side, a couple of benches for people just to sit down while their dogs and exercising and so forth, chat and visit the area. There's coming up this spring, we'll see again this year a wide number of different types of wild flowers growing up there. It's a beautiful area, and it has certain geographical and cultural values that should be preserved for the community. It's a real asset to the city of Oregon City. And myself, for my school that I have there, and speaking for the military as a retired colonel, I know that they would greatly support an effort to preserve that land and that park for the future of Oregon City. That's about all, Jerry. Do you have any questions?
Did you speak to the March 24th workshop beginning at 9 a.m.? Did you talk about that?
Oh, I know your interest on that. Jerry's going to present a presentation.
Well, it's not that. It's that this committee, if we're going to be looking at this issue in April, I think we should try to take a walking tour. Brian and I were trying to work together with you to put
Okay.
together that and then give a
I'm
historical overview of the area
I didn't understand the full scope
and the
of it.
geology significance of the area. The place is absolutely incredible. My opinion of that site is the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries would probably list it as one of the most significant geologic areas in this part of Oregon. Just very active geology, very interesting. So on Saturday the 24th at 9 a.m., is that true?
Yes.
At your armory facility, we're hoping to do a workshop and tell people about the natural history, a little bit of the cultural history, especially the armory's significance in Oregon City's history. It's a very significant feature. Greatest leaders in the city, I should be careful when I say that, leaders of the past that were great came out of that armory after World War II. And I was hoping to give some overview of that, and then hopefully we would be able to take people on a walking tour from 9 until 10:30 is the time. So
Yeah, that includes with I knew that you wanted to do the walk, and for your group here, and for the other citizens, and for our crew as well. But also, then I petitioned you to give a presentation on the cultural and historical, geological values of the park area, which you consented to do, and I'm very thankful for you to do that. But at any rate, that'll start at 9 o'clock. The crew will meet there at 9 o'clock. They'll first have the discussion, the lecture, and then they'll go on a walking tour of the park. And when we're through with that, we'll go back to trimming our ivy again.
And any of us, including those in the audience,
Yeah,
that would like to be a part of the workshop, not necessarily the work crew, but the workshop, are welcome. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, both. They'll be advertised. I think it'll be announced in this coming edition, not today's paper, of course, but next week's Wednesday's paper. We'll talk a little bit about it. We have a turnout weekly of about 15 or so citizens of the community that show up to help with the restoration. And, of course, this is open. The lecture and the tour will be open to the community at large, so anybody can come up, and we'd love to have them. We'd love to have you bring your axes and gloves and things like that, too. But at any rate, that'll be on the 24th, and we'll meet this Saturday, and then again on the 24th, and then again on the 31st of this month up there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norm.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Pete, do we want to go ahead on the minutes? Yeah. Does anyone have any corrections for the minutes that haven't been put forth already?
I don't know if there's like an amended copy of the minutes, but I know I was at the January meeting,
The January one?
and I think I was excused for the February.
Okay. All right, and excused in February. Yeah, you would just make a motion to approve as amended,
Okay,
yeah,
and that was, okay.
unless anyone has any more changes. And I'll make those corrections on the final. Thanks, Bob.
Sure.
So do I have a motion to go ahead and approve those minutes?
I move.
Okay,
I second it.
okay.
All right. Let me take a count here. Mr. Sinise?
Second.
Aye. Mr. Roth?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Herman?
Aye.
Mr. Carr?
Hi.
All right. Those three sets of minutes are approved. And I'll take notes for this meeting since Marlo's sick.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on to the presentation with Brian Vaughn.
Let me just get some things set up here. Great. Thank you so much for letting me come and present tonight. The primary objective of the presentation is to provide the Natural Resource Committee a little background on the Kanema Bluff Natural Area and also talk about a recent site planning work that we did, Natural Resource Conservation and Site Management Plan. I dropped you all off copies of the plan. So I guess just a quick introduction to Kanema Bluff. It's located adjacent to the Kanema Historic District in Oregon City here, with the two of the voter-approved natural area bond measures, the 1995 natural areas bond as well as the 2006 natural areas bond. 271 acres have been preserved at Kanema. A portion of that land that we're counting as preserved is owned by the city as well. I think the city recently purchased a local share parcel adjacent to the Kanema area just last year. So the first metro acquisition was in 1996 and was about 23 acres, and that was actually going to be a development for multi-homes at the site, and so mostly where the oak and prairie habitat is. And then most recently in 2011, Metro purchased an additional 181 acres adjacent to the existing holdings at the site. So the Keneba Neighborhood Children's Park essentially is adjacent to the Metro Natural Area and serves as the public's gateway into that natural area. And the site has a very diverse history dating back to prehistoric times, including the Barrett's floods, which washed over most of that lower portion of Kenema and carved out the rock bluff there, as well as the encampments of Native Americans and then settlement use of the Kenema site as well. So just a quick map showing the Kenema area. In blue is the 1995 open space bond acquisition properties, and then in orange or yellow is the 2006 natural area bond acquisition. So what you're seeing up there between blue and orange is the 271 acres. What I came to talk to you guys about today was the area outlined in red. We recently went through a natural resource conservation and site management plan planning process.
Thank you. Thank you.
So in 2011, Metro completed the Kenema Bluff Natural Resource Conservation and Site Management Plan. The plan was developed to protect and enhance the unique characteristics of the site while allowing public access. It was a 5-year plan that described conservation targets as well as recreation and access goals for the site. Metro had held 3 community meetings and had input from the neighbors as well as local stakeholders. Some of the local stakeholders included city, Grand Ronde Tribe, as well as the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council. The planning area for the site plan is about 121 acres of the 271. We went ahead and moved forward with the 120 acres that are contiguous with the city park because the city park was going through a redevelopment phase. And we knew that there would be more visitors coming into the natural area, and we wanted to get ahead of the curve a little bit and start planning for how we want the natural resources to be managed at the site, as well as how we're going to deal with public access. So one of the main components of the plan was identifying conservation targets. These conservation targets that we identified were wet prairie and upland prairie mosaic, Oregon white oak savanna and woodland mosaic, and Delphinium leucophaeum. Delphinium leucophaeum is a species target, and the prairie and Oregon white oak woodland are habitat targets.
Yeah.
I don't know if,
Is that plant actually present naturally?
yes.
It is. Okay.
Yes. So Delphinium leucophaeum is a wildflower. It's got a white flower on it. It is associated with oak woodlands. It's state listed as endangered, and it's located at Kenema. We found populations that naturally exist there, as well as throughout the Willamette Narrows area. There's also some historic accounts off of Springwater Road near the confluence of Clear Creek on the Clackamas Basin. There's one naturally occurring population over there. So with these, let me add a little piece here. So the conservation targets represent the most regionally rare and threatened habitat types at the site. We also recognize that the upland closed forest or the ash forested wetlands habitats that are there are also important, but they're not as difficult and tough to manage. So some of the threats and issues with those are a little bit simpler. So with each of these conservation targets, the plan identifies key ecological attributes. These are like the most important biological or ecological pieces of the conservation targets. We also identify threats and sources of threats to the conservation targets, long and short-term goals, and strategic restoration actions. So for example, for the Oregon white oak savanna and woodland mosaic, one of the key ecological attributes that we identified is vegetation structure. So within this Oregon white oak woodland, the amount of canopy that's open to the sunlight is one of the key pieces of keeping that target healthy. We also, so with the key ecological attributes, they're indicators. And so with the Oregon white oak, savanna, and woodland mosaic, and the vegetation structure key ecological attribute, canopy cover of oak versus non-oak species is a really important component of that habitat area. And with the threats for that conservation target, encroachment of Douglas fir trees would be one example of a threat that's present and well documented at the site. And with the strategic restoration actions, we identified removal of the conifer trees as a strategic restoration action to keep that conservation target healthy. So a lot of this is in the plan, and I guess I'm just trying to give you guys a fairly high-level orientation to the plan and hoping that you guys will take some time and look at that, and I'm open for questions on those things. A lot of the details and the key ecological attributes, the threats and sources, are in tables in the back of the conservation plan. So in the document, it actually has a bit of an overview, and then the appendices have quite a bit of detail in them for those actually parts of the plan. So this is a map showing how we have mapped a lot of the key habitat types. So the habitat types roughly overlay with the conservation targets. In shaded green is the mixed conifer hardwood forest. In blue is the ash forested wetlands at the site. In orange is the Oregon white oak woodlands. And in light tan are the prairies. Also shown on this map, and I'll get the cursor out here, here is the city park right here at this green square. And then this square right here is actually a city-owned parcel that we incorporated into the plan because it was adjacent to the larger Metro holdings. And Metro has been partnering with the city to manage those sites at Kenema. So I guess with that, before I move on to the recreation and access portion of the plan, I guess maybe just pause for any questions before we leave the kind of conservation target end of the plan.
I had a question. My understanding was in pre-European times, a lot of the prairies in the Willamette Valley were maintained by Native Americans using fire as a strategy to keep things open. But given the location and urbanized areas, how do you keep a prairie kind of open and keep it from turning into a forest if you're not using fire as a technique?
Absolutely. Pre-settlement, much of the Willamette Valley was covered with Oregon white oaks or savanna or mosaics of prairie and savanna, and Native Americans used burning as one of the practices to open up that ground for hunting or foraging of food, and what that did was keep a lot of the vegetation from encroaching in. Douglas fir trees, since settlement times and while burning was no longer used on the site, have grown back in. One of the tools that we use to remove the Douglas fir trees is cutting them down and hauling them off. Though on this site, because of the urban interface, fire is not as easy as some areas that might be down lower in the Willamette Valley where you have wide open areas of prairie and you can control the fire a little bit more. One of the key pieces of some of the project work that Metro has completed has been reducing fuels in the habitat types, especially the prairie and the Oregon white oak woodlands, to kind of mitigate for the fire hazard at the site. There's been actually 2 fires that have been sparked at that site, and while they haven't climbed all the way up the bluff face, there's always a potential there. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when we go into kind of some of the access and recreation stuff that we're doing at the site that's going to improve access, one for management but also for safety.
I have a quick question. Out of the 271 acres there, how much of the Oregon white oak woodland is in that area?
So with the whole entire site, about 15 acres is in the Oregon white oak woodland habitat, and then about 6 in prairie. And most of it is in this northern or northeastern portion, this 121 acres that we went through the site planning effort on.
Yeah, in this you've used both the word savanna and woodland. I assume there's some difference between those here. I don't see it on the map itself.
We characterize the habitat types so we could show them on a map and then also talk about the species associated with them. And then the conservation targets were a little bit higher, overarching combinations of different habitat types that may be present on the site, so we could encompass a little bit larger areas. With just 14 acres of oak woodland, and if we separated out the areas of savanna, we'd be looking at identifying conservation targets and trying to manage very small pieces of habitat, like 2 acres here with a little savanna to 6 acres of woodland and back to 2 acres of savanna. So for the conservation target purposes, we felt like the key ecological attributes, the threats, and a lot of the restoration actions would be very similar. So we lumped how we treated those habitat types in when we defined the conservation targets.
Okay, but so there's actually both present and
Absolutely.
so yeah. Okay.
I'll show you some photos here at the very end. We can kind of look at what we're characterizing as savanna. I mean, associated with some of these oak woodlands and the prairie, we also have some other unique natural resource features like vernal pools. And in these vernal pools, we have Oregon fairy shrimp, which are pretty unique little creatures that live seasonally in the ponds as they fill up in the winter and basically go underground or hibernate in the summertime when the ponds dry up.
Interesting.
You were discussing the geologic aspects of the floodways that came through there, the glacial age floods. I thought I heard you say that.
Absolutely. So when the Missoula floods came through, much of the site was scoured out, and we have essentially 2 rock faces. One rock face that leads down to Highway 99, and that's largely the Columbia River basalt. And then we have a middle bench that runs up to the steep face that comes up to the upper terrace, which is on the top end of South End Road. The South End Road and the upper terrace of Oregon City is largely boring lava formation. And so between the boring lava and the Columbia River basalt was a more erodible Troutdale formation. And a lot of that is what washed away during the Barrett's floods. And the Barrett's floods weren't one big wash in and wash out. It was a series of wash-ins and wash-outs. And so over time, that bank face eroded, and you see actually large boulders of boring lava down sitting on top of the Columbia River basalt. And if you look at some of the geological records, there's a layer between there. So sometime between when the Missoula floods happened, the Barrett's floods, those boulders had washed down and rolled down to a lower portion of the site.
And these vernal ponds you're talking about probably are associated with the scabland.
Correct. So those are in the basalt area. So much of the site, and especially in the Oregon white oak woodland areas and savanna areas, are very shallow soils, 4 to 10 inches on top of the Columbia River basalt, and that's where we get the unique mix of prairie and Oregon white oak trees growing. And some of the Oregon white oak trees are only maybe 6-8 inches in diameter, but they're probably over 100 years old, and they're just very stunted in growing in very shallow soils.
We were talking about Waterboard Park earlier, and I think a lot of the things that you're talking about are situated in Waterboard Park. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not, but
I'd love to see it.
it's a pretty amazing geologically active area. And more than that, these oaks you're talking about probably never have been increment bored to see how old they are. They're probably very old, 6 to 8 inches in a nice little thicket. Okay.
Absolutely. Associated with these Oregon white oak woodland habitats in the prairie is a diverse range of wildflowers that are out there: camas, Oregon fawn lilies, rosy plectritis,
Bram.
numerous flowers.
Thank you.
Yep. So I'll move on to recreation and access. With the plan, we turn back here. With this plan, we also looked at recreation and access for the site, knowing that currently people walk on the site. The neighbors have, for the most part, largely maintained the trails at the site. It's well used. So the plan evaluated the existing trails and the use by the public, and then we developed strategic actions to support a modest increase in use over the next 5 years. We assume with the city park redeveloping and having a new trail leading into the natural area, we get even more people wanting to come out into the natural area, see the wildflowers, and also walk through the trails. So the projects that we identified were constructing new trails, improving existing trails, decommissioning trails, installing new signage, with the signage that would be primarily directional signs. There's a couple areas that could use a bridge and a boardwalk. We also looked at an overlook. The overlook would primarily be for safety, where the rock ledge outside of the city park, there's a rock ledge that drops straight down to Highway 99 about 60 or 80 feet. So thinking now we're inviting children into the city park, we'd like to try to add some safety improvements to that area as well. Mm-hmm. And then the last piece is a maintenance driveway to connect Highway 99 up to the existing Kanema Cemetery Road. Largely, that road was designed so we could get better access to the site for maintenance and restoration, but also serving as an opportunity for us to provide a secondary access point for emergency crews, fire prevention folks. We could get a brush rig up 2 sides of the site in case of another wildfire at that site. So on the map, this is a map straight out of the plan, and it shows the different site improvements, specifically the trails and the roadways. In the solid lines are the trails, and then the dotted lines are the roadways. With the trails, the purple is the areas, the trails that we're going to decommission, and in the solid yellow are the trails that we are going to develop new trail connections. And then the dotted yellow line just back from the cemetery is the new maintenance driveway or new maintenance road connection that we're going to hopefully build this coming summer.
What is the solid red line, or the red line that goes around the cemetery, much of the site on the west side? What is that?
Let me get that. So this right here?
Yes.
This is a trail we identified as existing, but we didn't identify it to be improved or removed off the landscape. We felt that there was some value where visitors just generally rambled a little bit through the site, and so there was a very low-use trail there that we actually marked on the map, but we actually didn't identify it to be removed or improved.
One question I have on the access, one common, I guess, concern, particularly younger people under supervision is the presence of poison oak. And I know people were surprised up at Lake Oswego when they actually scared up a couple of rattlesnakes after some quarry demolition. I was curious if there had been any documented presence of your rattlesnakes on the site, or what the prevalence of poison oak is.
Lots of poison oak, and also we have not documented any rattlesnakes at the site. Poison oak would be very common to Oregon white oak woodlands, but also associated with the prairie habitat as well. We don't find much of it through the rest of the site.
Would that be, I guess, some kind of warning signs that the trail has, or is this something, because there would be a lot of unhappy parents and hikers if they find out the hard way?
That's a really good idea. When we look at some new signage on the site, it's one of the things that we like to do. That might be something really good to add. Sometimes Metro does have a sign standard, but we can also add small little plaque signs on the side of trails, maybe a poison oak leaf that says caution, poison oak.
Is Metro's policy to control poison oak or eradicate it?
No, we don't have a policy to control or eradicate it, though one of the key ecological attributes of the Oregon white oak woodland savanna mosaic would be presence of the herbaceous species. So if the poison oak got out of check, so it would be considered a shrubby vegetation covering quite a bit of land there, we might look at controlling it to promote herbaceous species, wildflowers growing on the site.
Are you familiar with Kamesa, a natural area?
Absolutely.
Just due west. I believe they control the poison oak, at least to keep it away from the trailheads and trail access points, because...
Yep, we've
And
done a
they're
little
also
bit of
staff
that. Yep.
But,
Yeah, one of the trails they decommissioned, they had let the poison oak grow over the one of the main
That's a good way to do it.
access ones there.
Yeah.
Good.
So
Good strategy.
they've used it judiciously.
So next steps and projects, and just giving folks an idea of what we're planning to do coming up soon. And these are strategic actions identified in the plan. Construction of a maintenance driveway from Highway 99 up to the Cemetery Road. I had shown you guys that on the map. Hoping that would happen sometime midsummer. Removing additional Douglas fir trees in the Oregon white oak woodland habitats. This was a continuation of a project that was stopped in 2008, 2009, and we do have a little bit of grant funding left from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to finish up that project. We'll be working with the neighborhood, the Cemetery Association, to work through some details on that project, and hoping to implement that this September and October. And then the overlook, trail improvements, and signage, we're hoping over the next 2 years to implement a lot of those things. I think the overlook would probably be our highest priority given the safety concerns, and we're currently looking to secure funding for those site improvements. So more to come on that, but we're looking to implement those very sensitively and in keeping with how the site is.
Do you have any idea how many trees we're talking about and their size? Douglas fir removal.
For the Douglas fir removal project, approximately 150 are remaining that would be identified as threats to the canopy of the Oregon white oak woodland habitat areas.
And the size?
I don't have the DBH offhand. I mean, I would say that they're medium to large size trees.
Large being 3 feet?
Probably 20 to 26 inches DBH.
Okay.
That might be some of the larger size trees there, and some of those 150 were 6 to 8 inch DBH trees. So I do have a table. I didn't come prepared to show the table,
Okay.
but if you guys would like more information on that, I'd be happy to share that.
Well, that was the reason I think we invited you to here to look at this, not asking you to specifically give us the number of trees, but one of the members of the community was concerned about the magnitude and number of trees being removed, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the key parts of that project is preserving the Oregon white oak woodland habitat areas and trying to keep that habitat area from converting to a more simplified Douglas fir forest. So the Douglas fir trees grow a lot faster than the Oregon white oak trees, and where we're at with the Kenema site and most of the Oregon white oak woodlands is that the white oaks are becoming to be shaded out, and that's why we're removing the trees. So how the Natural Resource Committee can engage in future work at the Kenema site. Metro, before we do work, we typically hold site walks or neighborhood meetings. So I invite you guys, probably through Pete, to join on any of those walks or meetings if you'd like to join. And I'd also, if you guys have additional feedback to the Natural Resource Conservation and Site Management Plan that we've developed, I'd be happy to hear any feedback. I'd also be happy to come and give any additional presentations if needed. If you guys would like to hear more about the Oregon White Oak Woodland Project and removing conifers, or the site improvement projects, I'd be happy to come at any time and give you guys more information on that work.
Thanks, Brian.
One, I guess, final question. I know there's sensitive cultural resources within the vicinity, but outside of not running trails adjacent to them and not marking them on maps for public use, what else can be done just to preserve them? Because
there's numerous, cultural sites that have been documented at Kanema. It's well known that Native Americans widely use that landscape. Also, it was some of the first areas that settlers settled in. So we have old home sites, we have all kinds of cultural resources at the sites. What Metro has done, moving forward from a lot of the neighbors' concerns in 2008, is we completed a archaeological investigation of the entire site, looking at documenting the cultural sites with the State Historic Preservation Offices. So any existing cultural resource sites that we have found or our consultant found are documented with SHPO. We also had the archaeologist develop a high, medium, and low probability map for the site where we might find cultural resources if project work were to occur, and we have some recommendations on how to proceed with work in those areas. So if in regards to keeping people away, most of the trails meander through a lot of the cultural resources, and just walking through there with the naked eye, they're not necessarily evident. And in the recent history, we haven't had any problems with any damage to any of the cultural sites at Kanema.
Brian, did you want to talk a bit about the tree removal process for the stump masses or the root masses?
I could. Do you guys want to know more about the process of removing conifers, or should I come back and kind of present a little bit more detailed approach and kind of plan for that project later?
Personally, I have a strong concern about removing that much biomass. Okay. However, if it's going to be used on site for some constructive purpose, down woody material, root wads, things like that, I don't know. Do you have a plan, or is it all to be removed and sold?
Well, we'd like to remove it. We won't be selling it. We likely incorporate it in other habitat projects across the region. One of the primary concerns, if we down the wood and leave it on site, is the addition of fuels for the site and potential risk for fire. So if we were to leave numerous trees on site down, it would potentially present even more hazardous fire conditions. What we have looked at is in areas where trees are adjacent to upland closed forest habitat areas or the ash forest and wetland habitat type areas, those trees would be down and left as large woody debris for habitat for wildlife. But a good portion of the trees would be removed off the site to open up the landscape for to free up the Oregon white oak trees, as well as to open up the understory for the herbaceous layer of vegetation that we're trying to promote at the site.
Logs versus branches are two different fuel issues, certainly, right? And I guess my question would be, is there, sounds like you were willing to leave some of the log material, larger diameter stems, bowls, near the ash forest. That's what I heard you say, I think.
Absolutely. Part of the plan is leaving a portion of the trees where feasible in the other habitat areas for wildlife habitat, correct.
All right. But in the other areas where it may be a fuel issue, I mean, there's a difference between a log and branches being left. Would you agree with that? From a fuel load standpoint?
Yes, there is a difference between a log and brush for fuel, but
So,
one
okay.
of our key ecological attributes for the Oregon white oak woodland is the herbaceous understory. So if we load and pile up logs or brush
Right.
in the understory, we're defeating the purpose of one of the purposes of why we're taking those logs out.
Okay, let me explore this a little further. How about snags, left standing, dead snags, standing?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah,
there's opportunities for snags, especially where any falling of the trees would harm the Oregon white oak trees. Some of the Douglas firs are growing up through the Oregon white oak trees, and in those cases, that would be a great candidate for a snag.
Okay.
But what we have seen, I think the literature shows, is that wildlife, especially neotropical birds that use Oregon white oak woodland habitats, are not the same species that use snags. So the snags would be very appropriate in an upland closed forest, but not necessarily providing the same habitat value in an Oregon white oak woodland habitat.
All right. My reason I'm making these points was we had a discussion early on when this committee came together about the value of setting aside areas, preserving them, the value of replanting. There's a lot of interest in replanting. I think the tree planting, the Tree City USA designation required a certain number of trees being planted and so forth, and it just seems to me that fundamental to what we're doing in part is to, where we can, encourage the retention of the existing trees. Now, I understand your desire to change the ecological aspect of the site.
Will it be
So I'm not
maintaining-
complaining, but
Yeah.
I'm just, if there's any way to use the materials for some constructive purpose on site, to nurse logs, standing snags, wherever. Might be
Absolutely. I
nice.
think there's always the opportunity to pull the logs up into the upland closed forest, but then we're working with how much disturbance it takes to get the logs up into the forest. So I think it's a balancing act of
Sure.
how much additional habitat we're going to provide versus how much disturbance is going to take to get the logs to where we want them to go.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, out of the 150 Doug firs that are to be removed, is all of that within the 15 acres of the identified oak woodland?
Majority of that is in the Oregon white oak woodland habitat, but some of those are within the prairie habitat area as well. And so I use the word approximately. I'm not prepared to fully talk about the project. I'm happy to give you guys some general details, but what we would likely do is mark the trees and determine exactly how many, what the DBH of each size class or range of size classes, so folks have a better understanding of how many trees and what size.
Okay.
So just a few photos here. This is looking out to the prairie from the park. This is the site of the future overlook. So this is the Columbia River basalt outcropping, and right in the middle of the prairie. This is a picture almost back to the cemetery, and this is kind of showing the habitat areas that we're calling the Oregon white oak woodland and savanna mosaic. So off to the right of this photo, you see some spirea clumps there. That's actually one of the vernal pools. What the wildflowers look like in the springtime, mostly camas and rosy plectritis in this photo, but numerous other wildflowers at the site.
How does this site compare to Camesu in terms of camas?
Very similar. The extent of camas probably not quite as much, mainly because much of the prairie was two old homesteads,
Okay.
and so the level of disturbance in the prairie at the site is quite a bit higher than the level of disturbance at Camassia.
And since I see a boulder or two, you see any erratics in there?
I've heard of some glacier erratics, but not personally seen any glacier erratics.
How recently has people been living on this site, actually trying to farm or anything like that?
Many years ago. Paul might better know about the Rakel House, but that was the last homestead that stood at the site. And
25 years ago.
Okay.
I know that there's some controversy over like mountain bike riding and trail riding and the compatibility with hikers or preservation of the habitat. Are you looking at specific strategies to minimize either the riders or their impacts?
well, we post rules. Generally, it's self-policing. We do have natural resource technicians and rangers that actually police the site. Though we look to the community and when we're on site doing restoration to help people understand the rules and why we're asking for those rules. For example, no dogs versus casual walking through the site, those type of things. So we try to educate people as we see them on why the rules are important.
Is mountain bike riding allowed on trails?
We don't allow mountain bike riding at the site.
Okay.
Not really that many trails.
Is this typical of what you do for each of your green space acquisitions?
We don't. This plan is relatively new for us. We do have this for a number of our sites. So once the site becomes large enough and we're ready to move forward with restoration, or we have something that triggers that, we do develop these site conservation plans.
Very well done. Very well.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You got a hand back there.
Yes, I have a question back there. Yeah.
First, thank you. I'm Paul Edgar. I'm the Land Use Chair of the Kenema Neighborhood Association. Working with Brian has been a pleasure. He's been forthcoming and come before our neighborhood association. We do have some real high concerns, and there's been a lot of consternation spoken at neighborhood meetings about, let's say, the extent of the removal of the Douglas firs, and some of it stems from the initial efforts that went on before Brian became the person in charge of this area. And at that time, they went in without conferring whatsoever with anybody in the neighborhood and just started cutting down trees like crazy. But one of the things we do have is a high concern about is the historic nature of the access through this. And I did provide a map to Pete, which reflects an 1846 McLaughlin area map, which shows this wagon road leading out of Oregon City going through this area. And it was the only road out of Oregon City virtually, heading into the southern or south or into the upper reaches of the Willamette Valley. And so what they did, the wagons, to get out of Oregon City had to get around the rocks, and the rocks went straight down to the river. So they came up, and it appears as they were heading south, it was kind of along on Center Street, and then they didn't go up to the high bluff. They stayed on that intermediate bluff, and then they went down to a point where they dropped over and then went along the river. And that's been pretty well documented by the Hedges family over the years, and they've talked about where Absalom Hedges had his house, his original house, and it's documented in this 1846 map, and how the wagons went right in front of the front porch of this house. And on their way, all of these deals. So his donation land claim is all of this area that is in fact this city and metro and all of Kenema lands. And so what we are concerned about is, to a great degree, is the nature of how log removal interacts with historic preservation of a cultural resource as important as maybe the only remaining urban example of a wagon road left, basically the Oregon Trail out of Oregon City. And that this is very important. And how we approach it, because of this degree of importance, is not something that we can look aside to. And the whole area of how we remove trees, what trees are removed. I originally came before this committee suggesting that Brian come before you. I've been hoping that this would happen. It is not easy for our neighborhood association. Sometimes I might say I feel like it's 50-50. You hear people, and those that are concerned at a high level and those who are not. And we're hoping that your heads, your common sense, your understanding will help arrive at being responsible. And that's is important. And so it's being responsible not only to a good plan, but it's being responsible to the history, the resources, and having enough balance in everything that we do that we come up with the right decision. So I'm hoping that to arrive at right decisions and move ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
Any questions?
I have a question. What is our authority here? What do we do in a situation like this? We're recommending body. In light of the presentation you gave us and the document you gave us, which is excellent, I guess my question would be to Metro, to Brian, I guess, is one, do we have any input that's of any value in this whole matter, this body? And then I guess secondly, since we're a recommending body, do we want to take any steps to recommend something in this matter? Otherwise, it's all been for information.
Well, it's primarily a restoration project. City would normally not get involved unless there's a structure proposed or a major impervious surface, such as a road or a paved trail going in. Then it would be subject to city review processes under the Natural Resource Overlay District. At this point, the Historic Review Board is aware of the project. State Historic Preservation has been consulted, and they're okay with the project. Christina Robertson Gardner can talk to you in a little more detail about that, since that's their purview, and she's the liaison to the Historic Review Board. Mm-hmm. The Natural Resources Committee is primarily what are the natural resource values that are being preserved or enhanced through this project, to the extent that certain structural components of the project go through review, such as the overlook potentially could require minor site plan review that overlooks the bluff. Mm-hmm. And potentially the access driveway, when it's cut in, would require some engineering review by the city engineer. But it's my understanding that Metro's intent here is to have a very light impact on the road, the cemetery road, mm-hmm. And so we're really just kind of letting them have at it. But, Brian?
And just to clarify, my primary purpose today was just to introduce myself to you guys and also give you guys a little orientation about Kenema Bluff and then the site plan that we developed. I wasn't necessarily prepared to talk in detail about the project, though I was happy to share what I have and what I know. Though I would welcome any comments and input, and I'd be happy to come back with more information as we get closer to developing that project for late this coming summer.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've got one concern. The money to purchase the properties comes from the Metro bond measures, but I guess my concern is more once you have these kind of up and designed and set up is kind of the commitment for ongoing operating expenses and staffing, because you're not relying upon the bond measures to pay for the operating cost and staffing. And is there, I would say, dedicated funds set aside to maintain staffing and maintenance at a certain level? But as Metro buys more property and does things, it seems like their obligations for maintenance and staffing increases proportionately.
Absolutely. We, Metro, we do have funds, a small amount of funds to maintain the sites in their baseline conditions for what they're purchased, largely water quality and wildlife habitat. Though we don't have the funds in hand to take the larger steps to move some of these habitat types into healthier conditions, or like, for example, the project that we're proposing in the Oregon White Oak Woodlands at Kenema. So we've largely looked to grant funding sources, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and other partners for grant funds to implement those large projects. Though the long-term maintenance of the sites is something that we've been tackling for a long time, and and we're thinking hard about how to do that. I guess I'd share with you guys one of my primary duties is helping maintain the bond acquired properties once they've gone through a stabilization period. So Metro does dedicate staff resources as well as a very limited operating budget to maintain our natural areas.
You've done a great job. This is fundamentally for me, it's a hard one because we're talking about removing a huge amount of carbon sequestration that's already functioning, all right? And I realize your intention is to create a different habitat type there. Let me put it this way. If 156 trees were removed from Clackamas Cove, there would be a ballistic missile attack. Now, I wouldn't be the one leading it, all right? Because it's the substance of what is in the cove. Now, that's a different situation, but that's why I was asking the question, is there some constructive reuse of the materials if they have to be removed? I'd sure like to see you pursue that as much as you could, the down woody material where you think it's appropriate. I know limbs are a fuel load, but logs are not, okay, in the same way. And maybe some, I don't know, uses of the material to benefit the community in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. But that's a lot of trees. This reminds me of Esther Lev, who I know very well, talking about burning Elk Rock Island to get rid of the ivy, okay, which they did try to do. But then they gave up because people were so concerned.
It would be important to understand a little bit more details about the numbers of logs, and so if we get to having the conversation again, I would be happy to provide a little bit more details.
Maybe some way
about
that they could be constructively integrated in some way. I don't know.
One of the uses that we would use the logs for would be, if we did have to remove them off site, would be largely fish habitat projects, either in the Clackamas watershed or the Sandy Basin watershed. Metro has been partnering with the watershed councils on numerous projects in both watersheds, and if we did take trees off site, that would be likely the home to any trees that were removed from the site. Mm-hmm. Though I agree with you, if we can use them on site, it probably would be the best use. It would be the most efficient use of the resources, the funding that we're using to remove those trees as well.
It's just the disconnect that occurs in people's minds that the environmental community is asking to burn an island, which they tried to do, Elk Rock Island, to get rid of the ivy, against all rules everyone else must abide by. And then the environmental community is asking to remove a huge amount of forest, dispersed. And people don't understand that. So part of the whole issue to me is proper understanding conveyed to them in simple terms. And we have a member of this community that brought this to our attention, so I'm trying to also honor his interest.
How do the other committee members feel about that?
Yep.
The tree removal specifically?
Well, about Jerry's concern about carbon sequestration and use of wood.
If it's put to a good use, which I'm sure they're not going to just pile it somewhere and let it rot, I don't see any problem with removing off-site or using them on-site.
Mm-hmm.
If they go into Clear Creek to enhance Metro properties, they're fine, mm-hmm. or some other project, because there's always projects looking for that sort of material. And they can do a lot of good in the right place, enhancing fisheries and so on. But there's a wide variety of places where I see them used. There's one in the Three Creeks area that a few logs were used in just recently that I ran across. And for instance, it's way different from cutting out for firewood. As far as the actual carbon impact and so on, because it doesn't immediately get added back, and the oaks will grow and sequester some carbon and so on. Maybe not as much as the firs would have, but there is a trade-off there as well. The one question on the historical nature of that road there is at the pioneer times it would have been a dirt track. There would have been no gravel, no nothing. And is there anything like that left at this point?
Yeah, and before that it was the native trail that they
mm-hmm.
into that area.
When they followed.
So it was a native
Has
trail.
there been logging in that area in the past? And would that road have been used as an access road for for logging activities?
We do know that there are numerous logging roads throughout the upper portions of Kanema that are dominated by Douglas fir trees or grand fir. There is multiple roads that have been used for logging in the past. It's really hard to say if those trees were pulled out of the Kanema Road or the Cemetery Road. Our previous work was on the Cemetery Road. What I know through consultation with the archaeologists that we hired is that it's very likely that wagons came down to Kanema because of the history of the graves at that site. It's the historic nature of the road is largely what it was used for. The alignment, and there's potential areas of alignment that line up with the historic road, but the road has been graveled. It's also been manipulated to make it easier for vehicles to drive down to the cemetery. So the road has been manipulated, but it also does represent an area where there is historic graves in the cemetery, and it's very likely that wagons came down that road at some point.
Pete, you were asking about the wood usage and things. If there's a way,
I'm done with the last one. Come on.
Metro might consider, because you were talking about creating an overlook. Maybe there's a way to incorporate some of the downed fir into the overlook construction. Maybe possibly using local use or some AmeriCorps or whatever to have some local investment or buy-in might discourage future vandalism or whatever of the site, by the use if they're participating actually in the construction. And maybe some of these down firs might be useful as speed bumps on some of the trails to discourage bicycle use. So I mean, there's different ways. I think on what Jerry's saying that it may be a little bit more costly, a little bit more time intensive, but it might, in a sense, be some kind of mitigation to keep the wood on site.
Using the wood for habitat would be our number one priority, and if there were reuses like the wood for the bridges or boardwalks or potentially the overlook, that would be a second use. I can say we don't have any intentions of selling the wood and marketing it. It would all be used, at least the large wood pieces would be used for habitat on site or habitat elsewhere.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, we need our agendas back here. There it is. Okay.
How y'all feeling?
Well, it's getting to be a long meeting already. We knew that was going to happen.
Well, I can probably get through items 5A through C fairly quickly.
Okay, let's give it a try.
Okay. All right. So item 5A is approval of your work plan. Now, you can change your work plan at any time. You can amend it. Reason I renamed it 2012-2013 was because some of the items that we added, we didn't really talk about timeframes for or who would be responsible for heading those up. But what I did was I created a table, and I didn't put anything in as far as priority numbers for that yet, and I didn't put anything other than approximate dates or no dates at all, such as to be determined. However, these are I believe this covers the items that we've agreed on as amended at the last meeting. If it doesn't, please let me know, and we can make the revisions tonight and adopt it. But my hope is that this encapsulates what we would tackle through 2013. So let me just pull this up so I can see what I'm talking about. And so the first item on the list is the addressing the Cove Peninsula stabilization, erosion, and reforestation of public lands, which is a city commission milestone. And it's an ongoing concern of the city engineer. It's something that we would all work on mutually. And that's something that I would probably want to report with Nancy Krashauer on with you. Bob had mentioned to me earlier today that we can create potentially we can create a responsibility column for who's doing what and who's heading up each one of these. And that would be an in-house document that we use together so that we know when things are getting done.
And there was another category too. I think it's really helpful
Yep.
if you have products or outcomes has like a final category, so you know whoever's like if somebody's heading up a subcommittee, they know like the outcome of whatever their work is. They're going to produce a report or a set of recommendations. Because you tie that with a timeline, then it helps people keep pace on their progress and stuff. It's just kind of knowing what is it.
Housekeeping.
What is it you want to accomplish by, the different work plan items?
Okay. And it allows you to reprioritize as time moves forward as well.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I think it's something that we can probably come back to you with. Second item is reestablishment of the tree subcommittee with our chair, Eric Carr. I guess we're starting work on this already with the Tree City USA application. And we'll be bringing before you some updated lists for review for the street trees, public trees, and nuisance and native plant lists potentially as well. We would start to evaluate our public tree ordinance this year and see where the holes are, and what things could be improved about that. We would start to evaluate the third item, which is reviewing heritage tree and grove nominations on public and private land. And fourth item, which is making recommendations for a program to assist with tree planting in public areas and with consenting private landowners. This could potentially include groups like Friends for Trees and matching grants of that nature. Coordinating volunteer activities with schools, with the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, and passing along nominations submitted for Heritage Tree and Grove designation. And let's see. Cove and erosion control and reforestation of public lands. I think we'll need to talk more about that in more detail at the next meeting.
Talk about the Cove at the next meeting?
Well, let's talk about that. How we want to formulate a plan of attack on a recommendation to the City Commission in that regard. So it's something that you can all sign off on.
Regarding the Cove?
Regarding the...
I didn't think we had any more role to play in the Cove.
Well, he's talking partially about the stabilization of the
gravel bar.
point,
Yeah.
The North Point, because
Yeah.
that's a serious erosion.
Yeah, we're talking about the hydrology
Right.
issue.
Yeah, somebody, my opinion is that it needs to be looked at by professionals in that area, because it looks like that is being undercut, and because of the nature of the situation, you can't really let that be cut through, which will happen eventually by the looks of it.
I think the best thing is to get an update from Nancy Krashauer and then bring that before you, and then you can ask questions about that.
I do have pictures that don't demonstrate what's falling from the top into the river, and it can't continue, because that will be, the river wants to cut into the cove, which is not something that we really want to see happen. Though it might be entertaining from a geologist standpoint just to see what would happen, but we got a river in the wrong place then.
I know Richard wants to be involved in this too.
Yeah,
so.
we should get him going.
I'm not well acquainted with the issues going on there, so at some point I would like it would be nice to have an introduction to it.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a gravel mine adjacent to the river with a narrow spit, keeping the river out of the gravel mine, basically. It's how it came about, and it's cutting right against that remaining peninsula, which is not that wide.
Then the item that we added based on Jerry's suggestion for establishment of a public education and outreach program, I hope I've summarized this adequately, Jerry, but if I haven't, that's fine. This would entail providing information to the public about existing governmental and non-governmental agency resources and programs that have responsibility for and which promote stewardship of the national environment in Oregon City. This would include hosting an agency roundup day to educate the public about which agency does what. We would update the city website to reflect the better ties between these agencies and help people understand when they go to our website what the city's responsible for and what other agencies would do. And include regular articles in the Trail News, which is a quarterly publication. Quarterly, I think.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And Denise Kai is the person who heads up the editorializing of that thing. So she sends out, we'll jump on that and get on the bandwagon and make sure that we're preparing articles well in advance.
Pete,
Yeah.
can I back up just for a second? Talk about updating the city's website.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe someone else has a better idea. Is there one place you can go to for, like, say, restoration projects going on within city limits? Because there's so many different groups. The Salve might be doing something. The Watershed Council may be doing something with Salve or on their own.
Right.
Or there's so many different people doing things. Not only is it hard to keep track of it, but sometimes people may be doing things at cross purposes to each other just because they're not talking to each other. And I'm just curious
Right.
if that's beyond the scope of what the city might be able to provide, or could that be...
I think you're correct. There are several groups that do restoration projects in the city limits. So, and what Metro has tried to promote is the Intertwine database, where you log on as the city and you record all known restoration activities, which is what they call the non-regulatory restoration projects that Solve does and Oregon City Watershed Council, et cetera. We need to update that. Basically, anything that is on Metro's website is also on the Intertwine as well. So I think what we would do
Is the city website tied to Intertwine?
it's not super clear where it is on the website. But it is there. So you just have to know where to look. So I agree with you. It would be easy enough for me to create a website page within the planning department that said restoration projects and links to other websites. That would be a piece of cake. I think it's a great suggestion. So is that something we would add under this? Yeah.
Did you cover the other aspects of the educational part?
Did I? I don't know.
Well, there was two other ones.
Okay.
There were ideas, and one of them is coming together very nicely. I thought I should give the committee an update, if I can do that.
Go for it.
And that was the workshop. I don't have enough of these for everybody, but I did pass them out before. Sorry if I got more. We'll send this one around. First workshop was called Conservation in America, the history of the major players.
Here it is.
In terms of who played a role in establishing conservation ethic. And the person that we're hoping to get to do this, and I'm trying to negotiate with this man on some dates, is Hal Sawasi. He's the Oregon State University Professor Emeritus in charge of the Department of Forestry and also the Sustainability Division of OSU. And this one I actually went to Dan Fowler about to see if Dan would host us at his conference center, the Abernathy Center, and he gave me a number of dates. And just to let you know, if we were going to do this, I was hoping to do one in the spring, one in the fall, maybe one in late fall, maybe at least two this year was the idea, especially that agency roundup one that you did a great job outlining, Pete. Ecosystem Services, I haven't talked to Eric about this, but it just seemed like that's something we could do at some point. But anyway, the Conservation in America, interestingly enough, Dan Fowler is reading the history of Teddy Roosevelt. And he was one of the greatest conservationists this nation ever had. He started the movement. And he was in Oregon. He stayed on the banks of the Willamette River at a place called the Finley Place with Sir James Finley, who was another naturalist. Long and short of it is there's a local connection there. And when I went over this with Dan, he said, well, absolutely, I'd like to participate in hosting this workshop. And he gave me some dates. I'll be honest with you, because of the timing, most of them are in June. Just for point of discussion, June 5th or June 26th. Our meeting, I think, in June would be the 13th. So these would be 2 other Wednesdays other than the 13th. I was hoping to see it on the 13th, but there's a conflict, I believe. So I'm going to continue to work on this unless people don't want me to try to bring together the first workshop at the Abernathy Center. And we wanted to make it kind of a nice event, you know, not just a sit-down lecture, but, you know, maybe perhaps some light food there, things like that, and make it a classy event for the public of this area. Now, this guy's an incredible speaker, and his PowerPoint presentation takes about 45 minutes, plus question and answer seem to be another 20 minutes to half an hour. It will leave people really in awe. And then a little bit of local history of Teddy Roosevelt visiting Oregon. I think that's a pretty interesting story that I'd like to, you know, see shared. So, and again, the one about ecosystem services, this is what you guys are specialists at, the Conservation Service, and I don't think anybody knows what that means. I thought that meant I could pull my car in there and have my oil changed, but that's not what it's talking about, is it?
No.
And it'd be neat to know what it is and how the community could take advantage of those things. And you've got a great agency that's, you know, right here. So that one's an easy one, I think. And the agency one's more complicated. Agency roundup. And then the simple lecture format with a nice message, I think, would be easy to do as our first one. That's why I was suggesting the Conservation in America theme, which I'll continue to work on if people want me to.
Well, certainly, we've got a good network of people that are fairly easy to contact via here in Oregon City. You know, you've got Eric, Tri-Cities, me, county, OSU Extension.
Right.
It really depends on who's available and who can be there on a particular day. So, I think that's something that we can facilitate fairly easily.
Okay.
Just having a venue, I guess, is the main issue. Time is an issue too, but that's okay. All right, I'd be happy to make sure I add those to the committee.
Okay.
Yep. Develop a program to promote carbon sequestration and address climate change locally. I'm going to talk at the end of the meeting about the Willamette Valley Resiliency Compact, which addresses a fairly broad array of some of these concerns, which may be a best way to attack that is by promoting the compact. I know this City Commission is about ready to sign it.
Really?
Yeah. There's a, you know, obviously it's but I'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay.
So, the item with respect to Earth Day and Oregon City cleanup coordination, we're really limited right now as far as time and staff resources in coordinating all 3 activities, such as Earth Day, Arbor Day, and Oregon City cleanup at the same time. And we have different departments who are responsible typically for working on those. And I think our best shot at pulling off a really good coordinated event would be in 2013, unless, you know, anyone really has an issue with that. The reason I say that is because we're on a kind of a deadline for Arbor Day. We're planning to hold Arbor Day on the last Friday in April, which is National Arbor Day. We're going through the process of working with Mount Pleasant, Gaffney Lane, and King Elementary to get students out to Chapin and Hillendale parks. which is primarily a ceremonial event. We always have planting events throughout the year as well, but this is the one where we really get some recognition, and we put it in our file for the Tree City USA application, and Doug Neely would be reading a proclamation on April 4th for Arbor Day. That being said, I think it's fully within our capability to organize, coordinate, and celebrate an Earth Day in 2013 with a variety of state and local partners and nonprofits.
Pete, I have
yeah.
a question.
Sure.
On like a Oregon City Earth Day celebration, is there typically a interagency steering committee that kind of coordinates and delegates, or does everybody just kind of do their
It's
own
Bush
thing?
and Jerry. I'd have
I
to say.
guess so the answer is not an official one?
Not an official one, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, Community Services Department, which is Parks and Code Enforcement, Scott Archer's the head, they have traditionally organized that, and with help from Jerry and the Basin Council, or sorry, the Watershed Council as well. So it's very loose, as far as I'm aware, because I'm not involved. So, yeah. If it's something that they end up delegating to the committee to organize, yeah, it's great. By the city council, the city commission delegating to the Natural Resources City the organization of this event.
I think, though, within the work plan and balance and other goals or things, I've done some major event planning and things, and it can eat up a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it's kind of a need, I think, to evaluate what are the expected outcomes you would want from the involvement in Earth Day, and how much resources are available to contribute, towards it as official committee activity. Because it's just you could spend a whole year planning Earth Day if you wanted to.
Oregon City Cleanup, as it started in 1988,
Yeah.
with 20 people planning the effort, is now in its 24th year now. If my numbers are right, yeah, 24 years. And I'm not actually involved in it that much as I used to be. I'm actually involved in leading Gladstone's Cleanup and Enhancement Day. And you never know what's going to happen. I got a call 3 weeks ago from the Cascade Council of Boy Scouts of America, and they said, we want to adopt Gladstone. And I said, oh, why do you want to adopt? We want to do a bunch of service projects in Gladstone for the schools in the city. Can you help us with that? And I said, well, yes, I can. I mean, what are we talking about? So we have 1,000 scouts that are available on a day. I said, that's a lot of scouts. We have it now refined down to 200 that will be up there on April 21st. But that's kind of the way Oregon City Cleanup used to go. 150, 75 to 150 people would show up, and 18 to 20 sites, normally 12 to 14 at least. Mondays 18 to 20 would be attacked and enhanced, and debris picked up, and all sorts of things. And so I agree with you. And it was a committee planning process, which comes down to ultimately one person to make sure it all comes together. And I think that's what you were alluding to. One person has to, being in major planning, bring
At least somebody providing the main leadership.
Yeah, but I think the network exists in Oregon City for a great Arbor Day in 2013, as Pete was saying, and also 2012. And I think the problem is there's mixing up of Earth Day, which is always Solvent Day in the state of Oregon, which is normally the third Saturday of the month of April. And then you got Arbor Day 1 week later, and there's been a real problem in what is it you're doing? And so we came up with the theme Oregon City Cleanup Enhancement. And this year in Gladstone, it's called Take Pride in Gladstone Day, with these 200 scouts. So
Wow.
yeah,
All right.
that's why I said wow. But I had to make sure I had plenty of sites with everything outlined for them and equipment and so forth to do the work. So, but I think it'd be a great thing for us to think about next year, getting involved with, because Nancy Bush is the present coordinator of Oregon City Cleanup and Enhancement, I think, isn't she? Oregon City Cleanup.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have the time to bring all the details together. We could help her with something, focus in on planting or something.
They've got resources, they've got
Yeah.
tools and
Right.
that sort of thing, but they just don't have a lot of staff time. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Last two items were the establishment of an ad hoc subcommittees as needed to fulfill your work plan, which is something that you can do on the fly. And Jerry had nominated himself for historian subcommittee.
What I really think I should just do is work on the educational programming.
Okay,
I'd
all
rather
right.
do that. I wasn't sure what historian meant, except I remember a lot of things, over time.
Sure, all right.
But I can contribute to those as I need to.
Okay. And then, we would review our scope of activities as we move through the year. So I'd be open to any suggestions or a motion for approval of our work plan. And what we would do is we would send this forward to the City Commission for their blessing at an upcoming meeting. Probably April 4th is my guess, if we can get it on there by then.
Yeah. Generally, it's pretty good. There's a few details, like update city website that, we're not going to have time to do ourselves. Or even that, I've done websites before, and it does take time.
Yeah.
And so...
Our website is pretty easy to modify and add to by staff. It's got a template format, and you just kind of type stuff in, and then add links as needed, and it's very rigid, and you can't change it. So
okay.
Yeah. So just depending on if you tell me what item needs to be on there as far as content, I can just create it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know something too? I think a lot of people are thinking either calendar year or fiscal year. It might be helpful, kind of. I think in the title, if we're thinking, kind of like January 2012 through December 2013, or at least we know, like what. It'd probably clarify stuff for City Council. If we're kind of specific on which time periods we're covering.
All right. Yeah. Do you want to send me stuff by email if you have edits to this, and then I'll edit accordingly. Basically, I used what the Historic Review Board uses as a work plan, and it's fairly loose, But I agree with you, Bob. The more specific we can be, the better. Mm-hmm. All right. Any other comments on that?
Okay, would anyone like to make a motion to approve this as it is with the potential for ongoing revision?
We pretty much need to approve it tonight, don't we? If it's going to City Council.
Yeah.
Really should.
I would think so, yeah. Because
So what I'm hearing is you'd have a motion to approve with additional items under the education and outreach component to include Conservation in America presentation and the ecosystem services workshops.
Sounds good.
And then also addition of a calendar, months to
And products.
and end products, yeah. Which I think potentially we can create in-house. I mean, for the city commission to bless this, it doesn't have to be super detailed, but at least they can see what we're working on.
yeah, this is just the plan, not the work itself.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
So,
Regarding the ecosystem services workshop, I'm somewhat hesitant to commit to that just based on not knowing exactly what the tree subcommittee is going to require as far as time and effort,
yeah.
and then in addition to being the committee's representative on the transportation system plan stakeholder group. So I would like to possibly table that for a little while.
Okay. What if I was to talk to, I can't think of some of your staff there, that told me about the program? take the burden away from you. I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, I think,
I'm not even
if
sure that-
somebody else is able to
Yeah,
or
'cause-
willing to take on the effort, then
Yeah.
by all means, but
Okay.
I can't commit to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Understand. Yeah. Right. Okay. I can't remember who all your staff are. I know several of them, but
Yeah, I can share some names.
they were the ones that told me about it, and
Yeah.
I was. You do what?
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So yeah. Okay. All right. So rather than table it, I'll find another party to work with. Is that
Sure.
that okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Good.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
Pete, are we at?
No, Eric, you're going to do it all.
Are we at maximum membership?
I beg your pardon?
Are we on maximum membership as far as the roster for the
We're
next?
full.
Yeah, we have 7 of us.
7, so-
Yeah. Terms, the terms, you can get reelected at the end of the
I
year
wasn't
and stuff
thinking so
like
much
that.
that. I'm
Yeah.
thinking the larger the committee, within reason, sometimes more hands you have to share their workload.
Right.
Has anyone heard from Richard? I've left him 2 messages. I've heard nothing.
He emailed me, said he wouldn't be able to, and he emailed the mayor today, yesterday actually, to say he wouldn't be available. I don't know if he's in state or out of state. But,
Okay. Okay.
yeah. Okay, great. So we have a motion to approve? The additional items.
I think Pete has stated the motion. In the spirit of consensus, do we have approval of this, or should we take a detailed vote?
Works for me.
Yes.
I'm fine, but why are we doing consensus all the time?
Why not? I'm used to it.
It's a watershed thing. Let me tell you, it's somehow a watershed thing.
Yeah, watersheds do it all the time.
Really?
Yeah, that's how we run the whole basin council.
Really? Well,
Yeah,
It's
we
18 people,
approve,
isn't it?
$100,000 projects
wow.
by consensus.
Amazing. Okay.
So
Well, I'm certainly happy. I would have voted yes. But
you just want to be on record. That's all.
no. Well, I don't know. Okay.
Okay, so
All right,
All right.
great.
in absence of further discussion, we will go ahead and consider it approved.
Congratulations.
Okay.
All right. Let's see.
Okay, do we need to look at the commission report?
Next item up is the Heritage Tree nomination for,
Oh, the Clyde.
let's see here.
I read my commission report briefly. We received this nomination on February the 15th from Phyllis Gehring. She's the owner of the property at 916 Center Street. Has nominated her very large Oregon white oak, Quercus garryana, on the historic Clyde Mount House property for heritage tree designation.
I discovered you can see the tree really well on Street View and Google Maps. And it is, you can maneuver
Yeah.
around there. I don't think, you can't
I
shrink
scanned
it,
it.
unfortunately.
You can.
But-
There's like a 7-page document with 4 pages of photos in there, and
Yeah, is that, that's in our pocket, isn't it?
yeah, it is. You want to click on the nomination and photos document and open that up.
Okay.
It's 7 pages. It'll
That's
show
probably better than
you
my,
several views of the tree on the property in different seasons of the year. And this is a good-sized tree. It's let's see, 38-inch 38-inch diameter breast height, 10-foot circumference, approximately 50 feet tall, and has a canopy spread of 87 feet. Tree is of landmark importance to the city of Oregon City due to its age, size, species, and historic importance. This is not listed as a state heritage tree, and the applicant is willing to have the tree treated by an arborist to alleviate any damage, disease, or hazards. But the tree is in good condition. We included in the packet the nomination form for the house, which is on the historic register. locally designated as historic structure, which belonged to the Mrs. Clyde Mount, and Dr. Clyde Mount was one of the 4 Mount brothers who provided much of the medical care for Oregon City and the county. The tree is shown on the historic inventory form as a large oak tree, I believe, and that's unusual. A lot of those historic inventory forms won't mention anything about the landscape unless it's significant. So that's an important point.
It is a pretty large oak. I've seen bigger, but you don't see them very often.
Yeah.
Pete, I didn't see where. How old do they estimate this tree is?
I didn't know what the age was. I don't have any kind of arborist report with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious, within 50 years or so.
I would estimate it to be in the hundreds. The biggest one I've ever seen was cord at 400 years. That one was 130 feet across, which is by far the biggest oak I know of. Right out of Eagle Creek. It's a great school. It's worth a visit.
Yeah. So, yeah, we felt that it met the criteria for nomination.
Yeah, that's a good picture right there.
Now, normally, I'll just mention this as an FYI, the Historic Review Board would not review any modifications to the site other than structural modifications to the house. So designation of the tree does require that the owner record a covenant on the property that allows for replacement if the tree is diseased, dying, or hazardous and can't be saved. And at the same time, the covenant requires that, the owner take care of it, do the right kind of pruning and that sort of thing. And it's obvious by the condition of this tree that it's been taken care of very well. So that's a property owner responsibility.
Yeah, I see no problem with approving this one. You're a willing landowner, and it's a unusually good example of this species of tree.
Great.
So,
And it hasn't been killed by irrigation system.
he does have a nice green lawn around it. Of course, that's winter.
I don't know how that's possible. And so many times they're killed by irrigation issues,
Well,
because they like the dry summer. So that's really good.
yeah, it's amazing. That's fall, and the lawn is green,
Yep.
and that looks like it was painted on that lawn there. So in the summer, so they do irrigate around it. But if the soil is well drained,
Yep.
no problem.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so
All right, next up. Sort of an update on where we're at with our Tree City USA application. The primary aspect of this part of your consideration of this is to see how we've documented our expenditures. We had 4 departments that I collected the information on. And so the budget worksheet 2011 PDF document is the one that kind of summarizes that. I didn't, at the time of putting this in the packet, I didn't have all the information that I could have as far as trees planted, pruned, and removed from all of the departments. So, this is sort of partial. We show that for the period January 1st through December 31st, that we had planted 170 trees. Pruned, we didn't know. 36 street trees were removed and would have been required to be replaced per code. So we included those. And so with a total of 206. included in your expenditure amounts for Tree City USA status, you've got to have a per capita expenditure of $2 per capita, and it can be anything related to tree care, including mulching, cleanup of leaves, planting, pruning, arborist care, city parks, street trees, etc. Community Services Department has a line item budget for big tree plantings of $50,000 that went into the budget this year. That's dedicated for tree planting in visible areas, and we're using part of that money for the Arbor Day celebration. Scott Archer is in charge of the disbursement of the money. Then, in terms of time spent by the Parks Department, that was the 20,000 number. Public Works and Engineering, they hold surety amounts for street trees. So any new development that's required to provide street trees, they pay a surety amount to hold that money until the development is done, and then you put the trees in the ground. So for the 2011 year, that money came to close to $48,000. Planning's time is primarily staff time spent on street tree permits and enforcement, and that's the 9,600 number. The actual value of trees replaced we put down as $3,840, and that is based on the adopted tree mitigation fee that we have, which is based on time and materials for one tree. It's approximately $280 per tree for street trees. So we kind of made an approximation of what that was. Code enforcement, citations for tree removal and other things, staff time spent on that came to around $10,000. So a lot of this money is spent on staff time, and that's an allowable expenditure for Tree City USA thing. So we're actually well over, more than double the minimum expenditure required for Tree City USA designation. The other three requirements for Tree City US designation are having a street tree ordinance or public tree ordinance, having a tree committee or subcommittee, and or staff and forestry personnel to enforce that ordinance, which is yours truly, and our parks arborist occasionally helps out. And then the final thing is you have to observe and celebrate and proclaim Arbor Day. And this will get you into the program. It's an ongoing program, and you can update it and maintain it as the years go by. It qualifies you for matching grants, technical assistance. You get the recognition of being a Tree City USA. So it's kind of a big deal for Oregon City, even though they've been eligible for a long time. We haven't actually gone through the process. Yeah.
I was at an Oregon Climate Commission meeting downtown, and it came up that up in the city of Chicago, when they're replacing street trees now, given the projections of climate change, they're actually picking tree species most usually found in kind of like southern United States, because they're looking ahead to see who's going to have the best survivability given the changes with the temperatures. And I'm curious with Oregon City, when we're looking to replace street trees, are we just kind of going with what they've always gone with, or are they taking climate change into account?
Well, good question. Updating the street tree list would probably need to consider that. So we're operating with a fairly outdated street tree list.
Yeah, because I'm hearing right now that like in old growth areas, some of the oldest trees are dying at an accelerated rate. So the climate change impacts on the northwest trees are getting documented.
Yeah, it's just as important not only to have the street tree list reflect what might be happening in the future, but also we have to develop some sort of planting standards. So for soil preparation and amendment, whether or not you include root barriers, et cetera. We do have some public work specs for that, but what's not happening is the checking, going out, making sure the hole is big enough,
Quality
actually
control.
making sure that the amendments are mixed right, ongoing. Basically we put it off on the abutting property owner and make them responsible for it. If the tree dies, it's their responsibility, and you've got to replace it. So it hasn't been one of those things, but I think what's important is that the very first trees that go in new development need to be spec'd and inspected to a certain level of a certain minimum standard, and I think that's where we're moving towards, but we're not there yet, and we don't have anybody delegated to do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
On city staff, I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, the climate change thing is, some people are looking at it, but there hasn't been a lot of implementation at this point in time. There's little facts like incense cedar is native about to Salem, but now I'm seeing seedlings around the Portland area. Of course, it's been planted heavily as well.
Right.
And then, so that one would be, if you are expecting climate change, you would expect it to move north since it's just south of us anyway. But then there's other cases like Oregon myrtle, which is also popping up all over the place. And according to the rules in the city of Portland, it's not allowable. It's an alien invasive. But if you would take in climate change into account, would that be true?
Yeah.
Good question. And it's been brought up, but nobody's reached a conclusion yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I have a copy of the Metro Green Streets lists, and I don't know if they even get into that yet.
I don't think people have thought thoroughly about it yet, but it's something to consider.
Yeah, certainly. Great. Let's see. So, we included a very standardized Arbor Day proclamation, which the mayor, Doug Neely, has got a copy of. He's working on it. He's going to add some embellishments and whereases, and we're also going to advertise where and when the plantings will occur. We'll complete the application form, which is there. It's the one-page application, and then submit it through to the Oregon Department of Forestry Community and Urban Forestry Program, and they submit it along to the Arbor Day Foundation, and then we kind of go from there. So that is...
Did you know a 10-day workshop?
Last week I spent a day and a half up in Vancouver at the Community Tree Management Institute, which is people who work with trees or end up being but tree people by default a lot of the time. So they were arborists who were qualified arborists, as well as people who aren't qualified arborists at this conference. It consists of weekly webinars through Oregon State University Extension Service, and it's bookended on either end with two conferences, and we actually have to come up with a project to submit to the Oregon Department of Forestry in order to graduate from this little institute that I'm in. And one of their suggestions was staffing and getting your tree committee work plan together. So it's kind of a logical thing for me to work on, for me to get through this process, and I can work with Eric on that. And that would be submitted to ODF in October. Yeah, and I'll submit a draft of it to Oregon Department of Forestry come, I think, June. But I'd be happy to share that with you as I work on it. Great workshop, good people. They only hold it once every few years or so. So it's helped out with federal money, and it was fairly cheap to attend. So it was good. All right. So how do you feel about the Tree City USA application? Feel good with sending it forward?
I'm thankful that you've taken an interest in this. Not that you didn't have an interest before, but getting this moving, what's it been, 3 or 4 years, I guess. It's really important that this is happening.
Yeah, well, there's so many aspects of a true urban forestry program that need to work in concert in order to be successful. You also need to inventory what you have in order to know whether it's improving or being degraded, and you have to have some sort of plan of action that is publicly vetted, and so both of those items we still need to work on as we move forward.
How did you get Scott Archer involved with an actual event?
That
very good.
Kristen Ramstad is the community assistance forester at in the urban forestry program. They have like a staff of 3 for the entire state. She's been great. She always sends me emails saying, "Hey, this is coming up. I know you've been working on this item, so you're invited." And I applied and got in, so they had a couple of spaces left. But it was Idaho, Northern California, Washington, Oregon, and yeah, that was it. Yeah, so about 60 people involved.
Well, my question was specific to Scott Archer is going to orchestrate an event on the last weekend in April. That's what I heard. Called
Yeah,
Arbor,
well-
Arbor Weekend Planning or what?
Well, we'll be
Planning.
doing it. We're going to announce the details of it on April 4th when we get it fleshed out a little more. I think we'll have about. I'm going to ask OSU if they've got any stock to donate as well. Mike Bondi over at the Extension Service, Bondi. But we have nurseries which have trees, some fairly large diameter trees that they're planning to plant, and then some seedlings as well. I think this was going to be between 30 and 50 trees in Chapin and Hellendale Park, and we've already got at least 26 students going to show up, but I think we'll probably end up with a lot more than that. So we were going to announce it at the farmers market as well on April 21st on the Saturday, and try to drum up, try to advertise a little better as we get the details fleshed out. So.
It's good. Well, it's good to see another department involved in advocating for something, and of course, PRAC, his committee, I would assume would be supportive too.
I assume they will, and you know, I've been working with Scott on this, and Larry Potter and PRAC. So I haven't spoken to PRAC directly about it, but I think we'll be able to fire them off something before April 29th, and hopefully get a few more people out there. So, and you all are invited, of course. So
Pete, what's the name of that event?
Arbor Day.
Oh, it's for Arbor Day.
Yeah. Yep. We had talked about doing it during the first week, which is Oregon Arbor Week, but we didn't quite have our ducks in a row yet. So, yeah. All right. Thanks.
Good.
Now the discussion items. I'm going to actually move over to the computer here to demonstrate some of them. So I'm going to switch positions. I'm going to briefly play you Nancy Croshour's presentation to the City Commission about the Willamette Valley Resiliency Compact. This is a consortium of local governments who are concerned about the impacts that the country and the Willamette Valley in particular has suffered over the last few years, both economically and job-wise. It's very broad-based consortium. They're concerned about sustainability issues. The idea that the Willamette Valley has several communities that are very similar in composition. But without further ado, I'm just going to briefly play the introduction to this. Nancy Croshour is the staff person who's been heading up all of this and has been working on it with Doug Neely for some time. And there's a lot of information here. So my advice would be to get through this. Actually, when you have time, get on to the February 7th meeting and look at this in more detail, because there are 7 separate agenda items for this.
The meeting she drugged me to.
Nancy's good at that, isn't she?
She does so sweet, big enough to drag me.
With a smile on her face. Come on, man.
I know she told John Lewis to drag me along, so she told him to do.
That was a carpooling maneuver. The drive less, save more. There you go. I like it. So I'm here tonight to discuss the Willamette Valley Resilience Compact and to allow the City Commission to become more informed about it, discuss a little bit, and not decide tonight, but to come to some sort of conclusion about whether or not the City Commission is interested in joining the compact. And briefly, the compact represents an integrated, cooperative approach led by local governments that engages state and federal agencies, stakeholders from the private sector, and non-governmental organizations to strengthen community and regional resilience and build a sustainable future for the entire Willamette Valley. And that sounds pretty bold, but and it could be that it's such a broad goal. It could be that over time we just make baby steps towards this kind of an endeavor. But this kind of an endeavor could be important in terms of at least having some sort of structure in place as we move into changes throughout the valley. And particularly, I think we're looking at how do we collaborate, cooperate as changes come upon us with agriculture, water, energy supply. Things are changing in this generation. And then to say nothing of natural hazards and economic issues and climate, and then even public health. There's a lot of changes going on with how we care for our people, and there's a broad diversity in the kinds of needs. But I think we do find, and what we've kind of found so far at the table is that the Willamette Valley has a lot in common with one another, and it feels like there's a good reason for us working all together because there's so much common interest. We're not mountain towns. We have the same kind of climate, and we have similar agriculture. So we also have we have our state universities in this area, and then there are multiple private institutions, all of which can contribute greatly to keeping us smart about our future. So I put together a little slideshow. I believe you recognize Mayor Neely up there on the wall. I do.
I didn't know I was going to have to do that either.
Where was this facility?
Not that.
So.
This was in Salem at Willamette University. So what is the compact? I've already mentioned that it's intended to be an integrated and cooperative approach led by local governments. And we talked also about what the purpose is to enhance efforts to build resilience against things that could have negative impact, whether it be through the economy, food, water, etc. It's non-regulatory and non-binding. It doesn't just include Metro. It doesn't just include counties. It includes whoever wants to be in it, really. And yet we are reaching out to local agencies and nonprofits and trying to get us all to communicate together so that you're never going to eliminate this group doing this thing over here and these guys doing this over here and these guys doing this over here. But it is an effort to try to bring a lot of that together, and there's an efficiency with that. Right now it's facilitated by the Resource Innovation Group, and they completed one of these compacts, which is going into projects in Florida, if you are interested in looking at. I think they have a website. I've not been on their website. So here's the Willamette Basin, and it's just a graphic for you.
Yeah, so I'm not going to get into a whole lot more detail about this, but there is a draft compact on the website that you can look at, and it talks about the scope of this compact. We've been talking about it in the Clackamas County City and County Sustainability Group that Brian and I have been attending. And the county sustainability office has been promoting it as well. So how it would be facilitated at the local level, I think, is the next question. Is resiliency to disaster, resiliency to climate change, resiliency to global economic impacts something that we can control at the local level? And if so, how? Those are some of the big questions that this compact attempts to answer. It's something that is definitely broad-based. It runs across nonprofits and governments and things like that. And I believe there'll be some more questions coming from the City Commission about it. If you have any questions from me about it, I'd be happy to, get back to you at the next meeting and update you on where the City Commission is at. But they're getting pretty close to it, signing on to this compact, right, as we speak.
How long have they known about this and the purpose of it? It was the first time it was gone through on February 7th as shown?
No, I don't know how long they've been talking about this. I think the intent was to have one representative from each community sitting on the compact board, and whether that would be a elected official or a staff person seemed to be fairly flexible. But I'd be happy to find that out for you. It's probably in the paperwork somewhere for this item.
Pete, I guess I'm trying to understand, we have kind of like our work plan, and this is going on. I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing how this committee interfaces with this compact as a work plan item. It seems like there might be more kind of things we're talking about, like with the street trees and replanting list or stuff like that. 'Cause I guess I'm just having a hard time figuring out how this organization interfaces, or does it, participate with this larger group.
Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of things that we do already are certainly going to be in promoting this kind of thing. The items that fall outside of our purview as a Natural Resources Committee potentially are economic development, what land use changes can the Planning Commission review, and those sorts of things. So the built environment aspects of it and the economic development aspects of it are potentially items for the Planning Commission and the City Commission to wrestle with. In terms of how our natural environment in Oregon City becomes more resilient, may be well within our purview, to the extent that our watersheds and our water quality is affected by invasive species and is upset, and the natural balance of those areas is affected. I think that's part of a resiliency
I'm not saying that the topic or the challenge of resiliency isn't part of this. What I'm trying to say is you've got the members here, the Natural Resources Committee, and then you've got this compact with all these different things. And I'm trying to identify how members here interface with the compact, not with some of the issues.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I think we can ask that question and see whether we can have a role in affecting the city.
That's what I was trying to clarify.
Nancy would be more than happy to share this with you all and the documentation behind it.
I might comment on it a little bit, having attended a couple of meetings. It's an interesting group and an interesting concept, but at the city level, it definitely needs to be addressed, and I would agree with the council moving ahead with that. But I think our role might be to help bring about implementation of some of the ideas, because it's the interesting thing about it is that they're taking subject matters formerly considered separate, like they're using the term resiliency to denote the ability to bounce back from natural disaster or social change, whatever. And so by enhancing the natural environment, we're increasing that resiliency. And the idea of, let's see, I'm spacing out on the right word here, but sustainability is very much part of it as well. You know, can we sustain our society in the face of, you know, the inevitable change that's going to come, you know, whether or not it's the big earthquake or the economy collapses or whatever, you know, or, you know, a forest fire, you know, on Panama Bluff, you know, it's all, you know, all possibilities that may happen, and our ability as a society to respond to that and in a positive way is really what this is all about. And so it brings in emergency management on one side, sustainability on another, and so on. And environmental enhancement would fit right in as well. But it's, you know, because I do notice that emergency responder agencies are showing up at these meetings, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So it's bringing together a wide, you know, a really wide diversity of agencies, and that's the positive thing about it. Whether or not any of our members need to be on their committees or not, that's another story. But you know, I'm attending with two hats on at this point in time. So
we're just about to start the mandatory update to the disaster preparedness plan, which we have adopted a couple of years ago, and it's required to be updated frequently. And primarily an emergency response plan, but now with the last 2 to 3 years going by, and the scope of that disaster preparedness plan potentially could change, because we'll be bringing in food security issues and those sorts of things. And I know that the scope already mentions this. Bob Cullison in Public Works is going to be the project manager for that, and then I'll be helping out as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where's the next meeting?
I don't know.
Wait, it moves around. Is that not true? What Ron is-
You mean the resiliency compact?
Resiliency.
Yeah, I don't know. I
It's
can
in,
find out. Yeah.
Let's see. Now, we just did Milwaukee. I can't recall where the next one's going to be for some reason. It's probably in my notes, though.
Hey, what's the Clackamas County's sustainability? How do they meet, or have specific date, time, or?
Even Polk and Susan Zolko are their staff for the sustainability office, I think, and then they're full-time employees. You know, they work closely with Energy Trust Oregon, and they're very involved with making buildings more energy efficient, and solar grant programs and that sort of thing. So they definitely have focused on some of what we call the low-hanging fruit, which is energy efficiency. But they're easy to get a hold of. I can put you in touch with those guys. Yeah.
Well, I see more. There's a committee though that meets Clackamas County Sustainability.
Well, yeah, this is just a volunteer committee of city and county staff that have been meeting with a gentleman named. Sorry, I'm totally blanking. Who's our facilitator, Brian?
Duke
Castle.
Yeah.
Duke Castle is a businessman who's been heavily involved with the Natural Step program for the last 20 years, and now he counsels cities and counties as well as businesses on sustainability implementation. He came before the Planning Commission last year and gave a presentation on the Natural Step. I think this group has grown around his facilitation and talked about, you know, sustainability efforts at local government level and how those can be implemented. Certain cities, including Milwaukee, I think Lake Oswego, have sustainability action committees. Milwaukee has a sustainability plan that the staff administers, so it's sort of an operational plan for city operations, and it has to do with, you know, recycling waste, energy efficiency, and fleet maintenance, and those kinds of measurable impacts. But the scope can potentially be much larger. So the real challenge with these sustainability efforts is what is it that you're managing, and can you measure it, and what are your benchmarks? And I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in this sort of cyclical argument about what is it that we're trying to sustain. And I think it's very important that you choose certain things, which is what Nancy was alluding to when she was talking about baby steps and choosing certain items, so that you can say, well, where are we 20 years from now, and look back and see whether you've improved or not.
Is Nancy the liaison then for this?
She is for the time being, yeah. She's just been heading up the project. It sounds like she's gotten dug to some of the meetings as an opinion leader and an elected official.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's as much as I know about that. Let's see. What am I doing now? Okay. What's my next item?
Gee.
Let's see.
Let's see. I was going to give you an overview of the Natural Resource Overlay District. Is that what I'm... Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see, yeah, the overlay district.
Okay.
Could I
Tree protection.
ask a question since we're
Sure.
running
Yes.
30 minutes over our time here? Are these items that can be carried over to the next meeting or possibly addressed through email or
The committee pleases, certainly they could, yeah. Yep.
The only question I have is under D, summary of the submitted land use application.
Yeah, let me show you this very quickly what this is. Here's a page on our city website. If you go to the city's basic website and you go to city departments, you go to planning, we post every land use application that is submitted here. And what this does is it brings up all of the formal land use applications that have been submitted with a fee, and it has the required public notice, the application materials, a vicinity map, and it lists which neighborhood association is involved. If there is a natural resource overlay application associated with any land use action, it will also be listed on here. Currently, there is one which is a natural resource overlay exemption request from Willamette Falls Hospital. Now, this is something that the way you would go about finding more information about this, if you were the member of the public, is you'd open up this land use notice. It would come up on your screen, and it tells you the basic details of the plan, who the applicant is, who their representative is, where the property is located, what they're requesting, and who the reviewing planner is. In this case, it's Laura Turway. Gives you her direct phone number. If you have any questions about it, you can call her. So that's the only one that we have on the books right now. A natural resources overlay exemption is a request to verify where the boundary of the natural resources district is in relation to a proposed project. Because our overlay is very large, and sometimes it's project isn't actually affecting the overlay district at all. It may be separated from it by a street, by a pervious paved parking lot or something like that. And the purpose of that exemption is to clearly identify where that district boundary is. Only certain things can be exempted. But, so that is a basic overview of that. And the other two items that I was going to talk to you about tonight, but which we can certainly defer to later on, are the overlay district, natural resources overlay district, the code, it's very detailed, and our tree protection standards for development as well. So I can...
What was the first one you said again?
The Natural Resources Overlay District, which is the new name for the Water Resources Overlay District.
And there was also the McLaughlin project. As
Right.
well.
I gave you a copy of the McLaughlin project.
Yeah, it's in here.
This is something that Alita Froman Goodrich is just at the beginning stages. This is a conceptual plan. By conceptual means it has not been designed yet. They're planning to go, they don't have a engineering consultant on board yet to design this, but the intent of the project is to improve the streetscape along McLaughlin Boulevard, to include slightly wider sidewalks, to include water quality swales, landscape medians, landscape strips adjacent to the sidewalk, decorative street lighting, sidewalk connections, and a traffic circle. It's primarily, 99% of this is going to be within existing right-of-way, and it will go out for bid to a design firm, and I believe it's David Evans and Associates is the engineering design firm that would be actually designing this project and providing engineering specifications on it. This is part of the larger McLaughlin Boulevard Enhancement Plan, which was adopted by the city several years ago. The first phase of this plan was the Willamette Terrace Promenade area. This is the second phase, and the third phase actually takes it down to the end and goes around the bend, I believe, underneath the overpass. They're expecting, time-wise, I think, to put this out to bid at the end of the year.
Does it proceed south, farther south than Dunes Drive? For instance, does it impact the vegetated buffer that's already next to Rivershore Hotel? Or do you know?
Don't think it does, Jerry. I think it's pretty much...
Rivershore Hotel would be to the absolute right of your drawings here.
It's just as far as the far end of Dunes Drive. So there is a traffic circle going in there. And next to McDonald's, there's a big piece of city right-of-way that is basically just a lawn area right now. Right. And that's pretty much the extent of it. As far as I can see, but it's conceptual.
Do you know how much effort's gone into talking to the landowners, affected property owners?
No, I don't, but they typically engage with all the landowners who might be affected by it if they need to obtain a construction easement, or if there's any additional right-of-way dedication required. Oregon City Shopping Center is gone through a master planning process on their side of the street to try to get the pedestrian facilities on that side up to current standards. ODOT obviously is a big part of the review and funding assistance for this because it's a ODOT facility, and that's.
What is the rationale behind the traffic circle there?
We just like to confuse people.
Well, it's a low-traffic street, and it's not a through, so it won't really be used as a roundabout unless somebody's going the wrong direction.
The idea is that it's a lot cheaper than putting in a signalized light, if there is a need for that, but I don't know yet. That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know if there's enough traffic, because I'm in that area sometimes, and you can walk along that road pretty safely because there's not that much traffic.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like it's overkill.
Well, the reason I asked about property owner impacts was, or property use impacts, the hotel, has buses come in there routinely. The buses can barely make a radius turn around the roundabout that was designed for them on the south end of the hotel. Mm-hmm. And then you have all the boat traffic, a new $1 million boat ramp improvement, which Scott Archer oversaw at Sportcraft Marina, area and so forth. And I'm just wondering how you'd handle boat trailers, et cetera, coming around there, buses. I don't know. Is this a public works project?
Yes.
to employ people.
Sure, yes.
I'm just wondering where this came up.
It's been a long time in the planning, you know, it's
The roundabout?
well, no, I mean, Phase 2 of McLaughlin, so,
I do know that.
yeah. I mean, it's conceptual,
Okay,
concept. Take it with a big grain of salt.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm a bit familiar with kind of bioswales and stuff, and
Yeah.
usually I don't see them associated with such large-sized streets and things, and I'm trying to figure out how big of surface area you're expected to treat, and what's.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to do it kind of for show or education purposes, but if you're trying to quantify the water quality benefits
Right.
of these, I guess on the Willamette River, that'd get kind of interesting.
Yeah. Public Works is very proactive about trying to incorporate low-impact development standards in all their projects. You may have seen some of their stuff along Beaver Creek Road, the corner of Warner Milne Road and Malala Avenue, Rain Garden, and so each new the Main Street improvements that have been going in, they're incorporating swales along there. It's pretty much their standard practice nowadays to try to include those to the extent that they provide water quality benefits, as well as educational benefits. So they really do take a broad-based approach to that. The design of them requires extensive engineering as well as landscape architecture, and I believe that they've been used in the past. They've used Greenworks to design their lid stuff. I don't know if this will be the same, but
Mike Fayol.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of what Nancy attempts to incorporate into all of these public works projects is a green approach to the managing the stormwater, and they will have to show how those swales capture the storm events and do the 100-year and 200-year analyses that they normally do. It's pretty technical, and I don't know a whole lot of the details, but that's part of the design process.
It must be for some pretty hardy plants, consider how much non-point runoff you get from that volume of traffic.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I know WashDOT has some infiltration standards for what you don't see. Underneath the ground and that sort of thing. And that's a big portion of how these things are designed to handle the quality of the water running off of that site.
So how long would those bioswales be, just for scale?
Well, there's a scale on the right there. Or the left, I should say. That's about 200 right there, so it's over 200 feet.
Yeah, they're extensive.
Yeah, over 200 feet. Maybe 250.
Be the longest one I've ever seen.
Yeah, well,
And,
bigger
yeah,
the better as far
Yeah,
as...
no, that's cool.
The Malala Warner Milne example would probably be something that would be similar to what they were proposing over there on the east side of McDonald's. Sorry, the south side of McDonald's, where you can kind of drain to one place.
Right. Well, there's a huge basin in there that would work fine for this. I guess my question again would be, what role do we play? Do we have a role to play here? And I guess it's up to others to convey their concerns if they think buses can't get through there and things like that.
Yeah, there will be significant traffic analyses involved with this. Kittleson and Associates, I believe, or John Replinger would be involved in looking at the safety of this traffic circulation and the number of trips that are going through that site. That's not the NRC's purview. The site plan and design review aspects of it will be, if it requires a land use action for something structural that's not in the right-of-way, planning will review it. If it's in the right-of-way, it's not going to come before you unless it's sort of an informational item. But this is certainly not your first bite of your only bite of the apple. We'll probably be looking at this in more detail as it moves towards once we get a consultant on board and that sort of thing. And Alita Froman Goodrich, who's the project manager for some of this stuff, she's really the person that.
Well, if we had a specific question, my number one question is, others can handle the roundabout issue because they're the ones who are going to have to explain what we'll do or not do for them. But since this drawing does not show anything south of Dunes Drive, there is no sidewalk next to River Shore Hotel. There's no sidewalk. And if the sidewalk's to be put in, it would either have to cut into the road, creep into the road, which has got a lot of room on that side.
It's a really detailed question, Dave.
Or it would have to remove about 20 large trees that have gotten established there, which are, again, it'd be unfortunate to lose them just to replace them with some juveniles. So how would we make a question to present a question to Alita or whoever? In other words, are trees to be impacted in front of River Shore Hotel?
Okay, yeah. Well, you're on record. It's concept plan. It's a little early to comment on it.
Okay. Well, once it goes out for design.
Well, once it goes out for design, then it'll be before the city commission as well. They're going to want to know about it, and I think that's probably the best time to attack this. It depends how, it's too speculative at this point to really talk about that, Jerry.
Okay. All right. Well,
but I'd be more than happy to provide more details about that.
Well, I can ask her, I guess, but on behalf of the committee, maybe you could ask her.
Is the committee? Yeah, I mean,
that would be fine.
I would like a motion and a second on that if it's something that we want to engage at this point.
Okay. Well, my reason for this is if additional mature trees or maturing trees are to be removed in front of River Shore for sidewalk installation purposes, then that seems like something we should be concerned about, and we should have some information regarding that.
Yeah.
So that'd be my request, is that we find out if sidewalk installation or any other factors in front of River Shore Hotel are going to require the removal of the screen that's there.
Sure.
Pete, I've got kind of maybe a related concern, and maybe this would be a future meeting agenda topic, but we've talked a little bit about kind of like mitigation, like loss of trees and replacement things, and it'd be great to get a little education.
Yeah, that's what I was 1741. If we had more time, I'd go into detail on that.
No, but I'm saying for a future, but I think it'd be interesting to talk about that when you're replacing those small trees with large ones and calculating how long before you get the benefits, or if the mitigation would take some other form, is it still within the same watershed or always within the city limits? But just that whole thing of how the mitigation takes place and how you calculate the benefits or document that benefits actually took place. But I don't think we need to explore it great to do tonight. It's just it seems like it'd be something that'd help us be better prepared.
That's a big project. If you're talking about canopy cover analysis and tracking it, there are definitely ways to do it. I don't know if we have the staff to do it planning-wise, because we're, just so limited. We have an excellent GIS department, and we have excellent aerial photographs for the last 11 years. There's various software programs that they require that somebody know how to use them and do the data analysis, like tree PMAP what is it? Anyway, but there are a few. David Knoll may be the best person. He's our information manager, and Chris Dunlop is our GIS coordinator. And they have infrared aerial photos as well. But I don't know how detailed, whether those can provide you an accurate depiction of watershed health or structure or canopy and that sort of thing, without going out and doing on-site surveys. which are going to require hiring consultants, getting consent from property owners, and doing detailed ground truthing, and according to certain methodologies. Yeah. Generally, we only review land use applications. Those non-regulatory restoration projects that Solve is doing and that sort of thing provide an excellent opportunity to know what is going on in the watershed outside of planning's narrow little focus area.
No, I'm not specific about mitigation.
Yeah.
Well, to get back to the point I was making, I make a motion that we.
Well, I'm not the chair, so that's.
Well, I'd like to make a motion to the chair for consideration that we determine from some source, through Pete's help or whatever, some source helping a staff or otherwise, the potential impacts of sidewalks and other elements along McGoffin Boulevard south of Dunes Drive, specifically adjoining River Shore Hotel.
I'd second that.
Okay. Okay, that's clear enough. And do we have any more discussion of that motion? Okay. Well, in the absence of any more discussion, let's consider it carried, and we'll go from there.
Great.
Okay.
I'll be happy to get back to you once I talk to Alita.
It may not be a big issue at all. Who knows?
Yeah, well, if they're not planning anything, it won't be. Yeah. But,
Right.
Proof's in the pudding.
yep. And, yeah, because that's still a project that's not planned, so.
All right.
Motion for adjournment.
Yes, so,
Second. Oh.
I think we're ready to adjourn.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, and we'll continue our unaccomplished stuff to the next meeting,
All right, there you go.
and along with whatever else pops up between now and then.
It was a good meeting. There were lots of good things we were covering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry it took so long. Bob had suggested for the next agenda I put time limits on the items. I'm more than happy to do that so we can stay on track.
Good idea.
Yeah.
We
Oftentimes you'll get a lot of public comment.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know, as you saw tonight, we didn't really start into the presentation until it was, 20 to 8. So,
Yeah, and that's our big unknown is public
Yeah.
comment. And this time we got quite a bit.
You
yeah.
almost have to kind of build in, I guess, a certain amount of time, maybe first at least 20 minutes or something.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
if we don't get any public comment, fine.
Yeah. And,
Home early. We can go to the local tavern.
the way that the HRB and the other boards will let the public know to fill out a comment card and then give it to me, and I'll collect them and hand them to you. But we had some people arriving late tonight, so you can never account for that. But generally, you want to limit them to three minutes.
I think
5.
we always ask ourselves, what is our role? Because they were expecting us to act tonight to try to help resolve. Some of them were. That's why I was asking, what is our role? So before we enter into the public comment period, if it's a bunch of things about the same issue, I think we should think about our role. If our role is to simply receive information, but we can't act, that's one thing. Because some people were asking for help.
Actually,
I mean, the way I would approach it is if the city commission is requesting your recommendation, opinion on a particular item, then, I'll give you a staff report in your packet that says the city commission is requesting that the NRC review and provide a recommendation on a particular item.
yeah.
So tonight, we weren't really there yet, but I'd be happy to follow up with Doug or anybody else who's concerned about that and see whether they want to do it. But
The other thing that might help is that when we do the public comment, if somebody is kind of supporting what somebody else has said, if they could just limit themselves to providing new information or saying, I support the previous speaker and just wanted to add this, it would save people repeating stuff.
Right.
It's just a technique.
yeah, I know, and it depends on the mood of the group. I mean, if some people are more conversational than others. So,
Well, I think the one issue for me was it will come back to us, Waterward Park, formally for our action on April 11th. Is that true?
Yeah.
That we're supposed to do something, make some recommendation that night. Is that true?
for which item?
Waterboard Park. Which is,
Yeah, 'cause
Okay.
there's a nomination, but there's a limited amount of information about the Grove.
Right.
So we're trying to compile what we know.
Right.
We have a tree survey from the Public Works Master Plan that extends
Right.
for a certain amount of that.
Right.
Gives you some idea of the mixture of trees that are out there and the condition of some of those trees, but it certainly doesn't extend to the remainder of the site. Yeah.
Part of what they were asking tonight was, I think, some people were saying, could we expand it to be more inclusive, a much bigger geographic area? That was one issue.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I think the issue is what role do we have to play on this stuff? That's an important message.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just talking to ourselves.
Well, I think you guys are the experts on this. So if there's a balanced point of view that they're seeking with respect to these nominations, because simply preserving an entire tax lot of trees without looking at the individual aspects of those trees or the subsurface conditions or the long-term health of that stand, we want to explore every aspect before we take it up to the city commission. And now we have the NRC fully staffed and available to provide that expertise. That's why it's coming before you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah. Even though we're not talked about in the code that way, I think it just makes the most sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So on our agenda for next month, I just real quick will be that issue, and then looking at the water resource overlay, natural resource overlay,
Thank you.
and I think those are the two things we didn't get covered tonight.
And the tree protection code.
Tree protection code. Okay.
Yeah. And now what we've been doing is Brian and I would rehash prior to the meeting what the agenda is going to be.
Good.
And then put the draft out for you. So
Good.
I would just ask for future meetings. I fully support trying to have time limits on certain aspects of it, but just being cognizant of trying to stay around that 2-hour mark. I mean, an extra 15 minutes, that's fine, and adjusting for public comment is fine, but pushing it into the third hour, I think, is getting a bit excessive.
Right.
So I would just ask that we be cognizant of that in the future.
Sounds good.
And as staff, please read your packets well in advance of the meeting. If you have questions about them, you can send me them originally so that I'm prepared for your comments. But, we'll try to keep questions to a fairly closed-end discussion. If we've missed something that definitely needs discussion, by all means, ask questions. But